welcome to another session of Chat Time. I am so excited. I will be interviewing a company called The Time Fix. I would firstly love to introduce you to my two guests who are the directors of The Time Fix, and they are Pooja Kelkar and Ildi Racz-Prosser. Welcome to Pooja and Ildi. How are you?
We are fine, Karin. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Karin. It's amazing to be on this podcast, and we're super excited to be here.
I am so pleased you said yes. The Time Fix, firstly, what a name. The Time Fix really does say that I'm acknowledging I have a problem with time and I need help to fix it. It's a terrific mission statement. Time and productivity go hand in hand, and you both specialise in one of those fields. But how does somebody just do that? Like, I aspired to do that every single day of my life, but I'm still terrible at times. How do you come about becoming a productivity specialist or a time specialist?
Well, I have to say that it just happened to me. While going through that process of having to become more productive, I bumped into Kirsten. We worked together, and one of the things that always fascinated both of us was how come we all know so much about productivity? And it's not just us, everyone. Almost anyone and everyone in the professional world would have read the book Atomic Habits or How to Do Things Better, productivity in general, time management and so on. Yet no one ever sticks to them. So why? What's behind it? And I bumped into this amazing lady from New Zealand, Jane Albiston, about 6-7 years ago, and she started to talk about behavior, and we had a deep conversation on how behavior impacts everything that we do. And this is where the whole idea of it's not about time management that we're talking about. We're talking about human beings who come with a set of strengths and weaknesses that will reflect in some shape or form in their day-to-day jobs, business, life, and that will actually affect the way we think about productivity. So it started with the need to become more productive, but then it just turned into something else, which is deep diving into better understanding myself, first of all. Why do I do the things that I do? And what can I change? And how can I be more aware of the downfalls and catch myself before I'm too far down the procrastination or overwhelmed path? And this is how we landed later with Pooja in the space of behavior and behavioral analysis, and Pooja came already with other modalities on board.
So the way I came across Ildi was I had finished doing some training around brain sciences and habit change and neuro change, and I met her at a networking event, and when she talked about time, I'm like, I work in the procrastination space and the habit space. Maybe one day we should work together. Oh. That was just a random sentence, and look where we are here 2 years later. My background is teaching, and for me it has always fascinated how some people learn differently and how some people take the same material and run with it right from day one. And I had always been interested in understanding why that happens. So I went and did my own studies, and then did extended studies and everything, and it all tied in together. So that's where we both come from. We were both very curious about human behaviors, about the human mind and human brain and things like that, and that's where we have a common ground.
Kirsten is our third wheel, and she's pretty much our systems and processes girl. She's the one who grounds both of us. Kirsten is usually the one who's, but how do you do that exactly?
Pooja is a productivity habit coach, and she helps professionals and business owners better understand their productivity through their behaviours and those of their teams. Pooja says this enables them to improve their productivity and time mindset, allowing them to make better decisions through better communication. Tell me what that means for you.
Well, the way I see it, and I think that's the same with all of us, is that I acknowledge the fact that none of us is similar in the way we do things. We all have our own ways of behaving in certain circumstances, and we all come with a baggage of our own from our past and from the way we've been brought up, our culture, etc. And that's what develops our mindset. So Productivity is then acknowledging that it's actually a mindset. It's not something that you actually do that makes you productive. It's how you look at it and how your behaviors reflect the way you look at it. So when you start to understand what it really means for you, you tend to express yourself better. You express yourself better to your team. That makes you a better communicator. You can communicate better with your team and what you expect of them as well.
The first thing I think about in that explanation is, okay, I have to be a little easier on my husband because I think perhaps our definition of productivity might be different.
100%.
And rather than giving him a hard time, I need to understand what his mindset around productivity is versus mine.
Oh, well, we've done our job.
Yeah. Ildi is a time management specialist. She enables you to get more time when it really counts. Ildi designs healthy time management habits and creates a proactive time mindset that leads to business or professional success. Explain that to me.
Well, it actually ties in really well with what Pooja said before. Usually when we work with anyone, it's a little bit the other way around, because I kind of create a time mindset and then Pooja makes sure that you have the habits behind it to stick to it. What I really mean is, and it goes back to my history, I always say that I'm missing the organized gene. And that's true. If you would know me and you would see my desk and my home, you would understand this statement at its full extent. I landed in this space because I needed to become more productive. I was going through a divorce and I just had to become more productive because I had to support suddenly my 2 children. So when I talk about time mindset and how that ties with productivity, is finding your unique way to how make the most of your time and how can you define productivity the best possible way for you that resonates with you, so that you're not trying to copy someone else's way, but you actually find a way to your own truth so that you can be the best version of yourself.
Yeah, it's terrific. And I love it that you both obviously focus on is the mindset element. There's more to it than just planning and not able to achieve intentions.
Well, what we found is that most of us do try to live up to someone else's expectations. Even if you are a solopreneur and you're home, or you're a professional working from home, where virtually there's no one putting pressure on you, you still are trying to live up to someone else's expectations. And what's wrong with that is that you might be even more productive if you would live up to your own expectations.
Oh.
This is why we say that it's all about making friends with your time. It's all about understanding what productivity means to you. It's all about figuring out whether you like to work for 1 hour uninterrupted or for 10 minutes uninterrupted. Just by having that clarity around what these words mean and how you are productive and how can you bring the best of you to the table, your productivity can jump by 15 to 20%. Without even changing anything, just starting to honor your own way to be more productive.
And what we also find is that once you have recognized your strengths and acknowledged your challenges, that little guilt, that guilty voice that speaks to you all the time that you're not doing it right goes away. Because then you know yourself really well. You know why certain things are not working the way it will work for somebody else. And then that's when you will stop holding yourself up to somebody else's standards.
And procrastination.
And
I mean, we use this
procrastination.
word so randomly, but what does it exactly mean? And specifically, what does it mean to you? And suddenly the whole concept that is behind procrastination changes. Because in the end, you can be procrastinating and it's positive, because you might need that switch off to be able to digest information and allow yourself to procrastinate about something for a little while. It's that concept of what do you put behind that word, procrastination. And people laugh when I say put on the timer. And do 5 minutes of procrastination did not kill anyone.
Fantastic. So, okay, guilt gone all of a sudden. No, but it's true. I guess it comes down to the awareness. As soon as we're aware of it, it does. And that guilt that you're talking about, Pooja, is absolutely real. I know I feel it often. I'm on the go all the time. And from the outside, people are like, gosh, you are such a great time manager. I just feel like I'm the worst time manager, actually. And on top of that, I'm doing things all the time. Those moments that you do procrastinate, I know for me, I feel so guilty about it, but having the awareness that maybe that's what I actually need is so empowering.
What you just said is absolutely true. Like, other people will say you're so put together, and you're suddenly living up to those standards as well. If they think I'm put together, I have to be put together all the time. And you don't stop giving yourself permission to let go of some things or say, I can't do this, because now you're holding yourself to that person's standard. Built on all levels, we kind of feel guilty about everything all the time. And the moment you recognize yourself and you know yourself, all of that guilt fades away.
Now imagine this kind of awareness within a team. Imagine if it's not just on an individual level, but you bring this kind of awareness to a team where everyone understands not just themselves, but those people around them. So instead of interrupting unintentionally and setting back someone in their work, you quietly help them to actually get where they need to, where people are supporting each other and are talking the same kind of team time language. Imagine the level of productivity that can be achieved within a team when you're not just assuming what the other person might like, but you actually know what the other person likes.
That is so powerful, and I really want to dive into the whole team thing. As you know, my lens is really around project teams, and time management is something that we need to think about in everything that we do. It comes into absolutely every part of our lives. But on a project sphere, it's just such a critical thing because projects are bound by time commitments. They're bound by scope and by budgets as well. But with the time, if you can't get something done in the time you've estimated, then that throws out the scope and the budget and a whole heap of other things. So you're never going to be able to meet your commitments. And it also impacts trust as well. That's one of the reasons I've been drawn to you. From a project's perspective, just like a time or productivity perspective, we have plans, we try and stick to them, all those sorts of things. And it's the same thing with projects. On a project, you know you have to scope out a project, you have to speak to certain stakeholders, you've got to build a plan, you put something together, you test it, and then eventually you put it out there. And there is lots of training, which is very founded. But the problem is that the training doesn't take into consideration the human elements. As you said, we are all from different walks of life. We have different experiences. Some are positive, some are negative. Some things we want to jump into because we've had a positive experience. Some things we want to back away from because we've had a negative experience. It doesn't mean we can't do any of those things. It just means that we have a lens that we've continued to apply. Hence why I love to focus on the people element of how we succeed, to plans and scopes and all that sort of stuff, knowing that we are diverse and different. Let's talk projects, because I can tell you every single project on the face of the planet will need you guys. I know that's a big statement, but we all know projects that are run over time and they say it will take this much and it takes longer for various reasons. The problems that happen within the teams are unreasonable expectations put onto them to begin with, do things within a period of time, and perhaps they say yes because that's their job, right? That's the reality, that's the bottom line. Nobody wants to lose their job, everybody wants to be put up for the next promotion, so you say yes because you think you're expected to, coming back to what we think we're expected to do. And sometimes our teams are involved in helping us put together those timelines as well. But again, they do it based on what they think that they're expected to say. So it's not always a true and an honest. And sometimes it's just because they think that they can do it. Yes. And they don't take into consideration any of these great juicy things that you were just talking about. I see two problems and I'd love you to be able to help me dissect them. And then I want to be able to provide our listeners with some valuable tips that they can take for themselves as well as for their teams. Firstly, the leader of the project. They are receiving commands from their senior management and they're providing it down as well. So they're already in a position of conflict because they are the same as their team where they want to say yes to everything. They're no different to anybody else. At times they question whether that can or cannot be achieved, and then they push that down to their team and those expectations. What would we say to those leaders? What are the things that you see as problems potentially in project leaders, and then what can we do about them?
As for the leaders, we are looking at two leader tranches, right? It's the main stakeholders who want something done within the company and something delivered, which will be passed on to the lower management who then controls the team. First of all, both leaders really don't know themselves. They're doubting themselves, what their strengths are, what kind of leaders can they be, how can they communicate better, what languaging suits the person they're talking to. And because they don't know themselves, they don't think knowing their team is important either. Because when you don't know your strengths, you're not concerned about what other person thinks. Because it doesn't matter which level you are a leader at. You could be the CEO of the company throwing orders at the lower management or the mid management. Does not mean you know everything.
Making assumptions about the people around you has that trap of thinking that some people can do more than what they can really do. We find that it is really, really important to understand exactly what is the ability and the capability of the team. And sometimes just simple things and caring for your team can uplift productivity. You know that little saying, treat others
Yes.
like you like to be
Yes.
treated?
Yep.
You know that? You grew up with it. Well, we're here to tell you, you shouldn't. You want to treat others like you like to be treated.
It's a good point, because I guess you do need to know yourself and understand how you work to then know how you make decisions around time and how you can then have conversations with other people and get their understanding and what have you. But most of the leaders I've worked with, and look, I probably put myself in that category as well, we all think that we know ourselves really well. You know, if we're talking about assumptions, I think that's one of the grossest assumptions that we make. Until somebody starts to point something out or you have reason to question, you probably do think you know yourself very well and you know what your strengths or weaknesses are. So what advice could you give to a leader who perhaps they do think that they know themselves, and maybe they do, but what's a good way of checking whether you do or don't? Are there any tips?
Be curious. That's the first thing. Be curious. Don't assume, and when the slightest doubt comes to the front of mind, ask questions. Don't be complacent. And just because you think that something is set, it doesn't mean that it is really set. So be always curious, because you can learn so much from others about yourself. And just by trying to understand what others understand from what you are trying to convey and say. It's a funny thing. We're coming from a very multicultural background. Sometimes people like us, I mean, Pooja and myself, you can tell from the accent that we didn't grow up in Australia, we naturally know that we have to ask more questions. So we have this little bonus behind us that we're prompted to ask more questions, because we know that we have to make sure that the other person in front of us does understand what we really mean. But when you jump into that leadership kind of role, you start forgetting that you have to be curious about your team, that you cannot look at the things around you just from your bubble. Just pop your head in from time to time into someone else's world and see what they are thinking, see how they are looking at things, and that helps you grow as a person too.
And again, assuming that you know yourself really well is again another big downfall, because we don't take into consideration the different phases of life that you go through. And those phases of life mold you, make you different. And sometimes we don't have enough time, funnily enough, to introspect. We don't give that time to ourselves to introspect and think, have I changed here? Has something changed about me? Am I behaving differently? And if I am, why? So not only do you ask questions of the others, ask open-ended questions of yourself as well. Open-ended, because that will bring up more explanation. Don't ask yes or no questions. The moment you're given feedback, don't put your walls up, because we tend to become very defensive. But that can be a moment of learning and knowing yourself even better.
And
Very
also,
good starting
I guess
point.
by having that curiosity about yourself and then the curiosity about those around you, and I'm thinking mostly around project managers, because project managers are the ones who feel like they take a lot of the pressure. They're the ones who need to coax the timelines out of people. They are the ones who are personally bound by those timelines and those commitments if they've made them. But I feel don't necessarily question up to understand, why do you want to do this? What are you trying to achieve? And continuously ask those curious questions to find out, and let the leadership speak and work out, how do I feel with that information? Do I feel confident about that? Do I feel like that would even work? What comes up for me? And I think being curious allows you to do that.
Often we find that set standards are not necessarily aligned with the expectations. We have an amazing client, and his team ended up saying to us, but once we hit the expectation, you straight away lift the expectation to a whole new level, so we can never breathe. He was like, but isn't that natural? No. Most of us actually like to enjoy that we achieve it and celebrate and just feel comfortable in it. So it's really realizing that the people around you are not necessarily like you, and by constantly raising the expectations, you are taking away that moment of satisfaction and fulfillment from the team, so they can never enjoy that, and that's needed in the process of moving forward. So instead of always living up to just your own expectation, just look around and make sure that standards that are achievable are doable and set to the expectation of the client. So there's nothing wrong with doing a little bit more, but you don't have to do 3-4 times better. So knowing exactly what you have to achieve, and when it becomes just a cosmetic, it goes back again to what we said, knowing your people, knowing their abilities, knowing your client, knowing what they expect and what their needs are. Because if they only want 2 shoes that have shoelaces, then you don't necessarily need to do airbags and self-lacing up systems. Really knowing exactly what's expected of you and doing that to perfection.
And also celebrating the little wins. Allow your team to celebrate those little wins. And don't let that come with a condition. You've done this, but no, you've done this well, period. Let's celebrate that.
Yes,
and we look at what's not done well later on.
Or what could be done differently and so on.
And then there's the team itself.
From the perspective of time management, time mindset, way too often we hear, we think it would take us. That little word would is a huge problem, because in the end time is measurable. So you can actually measure how long different tasks take. You can average it out and do all those things. Time is easily most measurable thing in our lives. But what we see as the biggest problem is that most of the times no one takes in consideration that as much as a job will take, let's say, an hour, no one takes in consideration that there's a human being who does that job behind a screen or on field or wherever. And that human being can come from whole different walks of life. Some will be faster, some will be slower, some will be adaptable, some will need to actually go back and research, some will be a mix of the whole lot. And in every single scenario, you have to allocate time just for the human being that is behind the job. So you can't treat a task just as a task, because we're not robots. We still have to stand up, we still have to go to the bathroom, we still have to eat, drink, you still have to nurture ourselves, we still have to have some conversations around the water cooler, because otherwise some of us will go insane. Others will say, I don't need it, but you don't always know exactly on whose ball court will that job land. And what we see when time is allocated, it is allocated to the job and not to the team. So they don't take in consideration the makeup of the team. So when you look at a project, I think besides the obvious things that you know, like budgets and timeframes and so on, you really have to think about the team that will be behind it. What is the makeup of the team? How do they prefer to work? How can you actually facilitate maximum productivity behind them? So you really have to have a very good understanding of the people who are on the team.
The next step is to understand who they are. What is your team made up of? What type of personalities? Something you touched on earlier is the e-disc profiling. I know that there's a whole science behind it, and I've gotten a glimpse from you guys about it, which I absolutely love. And again, another reason it saved my marriage, by the way. Can you just tell us what the 4 different segments are of that profiling, and just a little snippet on each of them? Like, so what could people be looking for as a leader? What should I know? How can I identify what they are?
So before we even say what they are, what's really important is that there's no such thing as one behavioral style. We are all a mix of the 4 major behavioral styles, so there's quite a few different mix-ups, and then obviously everyone has different level of strength in the different styles. What you really have to understand is that there's no such thing as I can't do it. It's not about not being able to do something or not being able to function in a different space than what's natural to us. The only question is how much energy it will take to play in that space. So just because you're not, let's say, an influencer who's a bubbly person, who is the life of the party and so on, it doesn't mean that you can't be that kind of person. It doesn't mean that you can't throw the party of the century. It just means that it might take up a lot of energy. And at the end of it, you will have to take care of yourself. And you will have to nurture who you really are. When it comes to this tool we use, it's called Extended Disc. What we found is that there's 4 major behavioral styles: the dominant, influencer, stabilizer, and compliant.
There are 4 major styles, and we are a combination of all 4 styles. So if you recognize yourself in all 4, that's not odd, but you will always have more or less of one or the other. So the first style that we'll talk about is the dominant, and the dominants are in their productivity style. They are the ones who feel that time is money. If you've heard that statement, time is money, they are the ones who relate to it the most. Okay. For them, if you waste their time, then you have done a big crime against them. If you're running late, make sure you let them know that you're running late. Otherwise, they'll be really angry with you. They won't like it. The second style is eyes. For them, dying doesn't mean anything. It's all related to relationships and to people. If they can make people happy, if they can have a fun time, then they'll be the happiest people in everything. But for them, they keep moving from one thing to the other. So time goes out the window. They have this, what we call a shiny object syndrome. So once they see something, they get really excited about it. And then they see the other, they get really excited about that. And then nothing seems to materialize, so they cannot focus on one thing. And with the time goes out the window, right? I can talk about the S's because that's her speciality.
Well, it's a funny thing because as a general behavioral makeup, I'm a DS, which is a little bit on the opposite of the spectrum. The S's always have enough time. And about 60% of the population is playing strongly in that S space. Most of the times when someone says, I don't have time, they probably have. They are just not aware of it. The only problem with a stabilizer or someone who is playing in that stabilizer space is that their biggest stress is the fear of running out of time. And because that fear is there, that's a constant pressure. And because the pressure is there, they easily go into overwhelm and procrastination. I'll give you an example. My beautiful dad, he was a typical S. When we were going somewhere, he would be at least an hour earlier than the earliest time we had to be there. I was always angry with him. Why do we have to be there so early? What will you do for an hour doing nothing?
Wasn't fun.
And especially when we were kids. So you had to be on time or well before time. In our family, my mom's the other end. Time is a concept, just a concept to her. My grandmother used to visit us on a regular basis, so my dad's job was always to take her to the train station so she's not missing the train. The one time he could not take her out, my mom had to take her out, my grandmother missed the train. A true S really likes to make sure that there's no time pressure. And this is what happens typically in a team or in a project. You allocate the jobs and then someone comes and says, oh, but this needs to be done now. And the S would say, oh, I can't do that. So the first reaction is, it doesn't fit in my time. I didn't plan for it. I don't know where to start this whole thing. How do I find information? How can I actually perform in such a short period of time without being prepared? And the key is being prepared. This is why it's a huge problem when you don't know your team. There's people in your team who you can spring on tasks like this, and they will perform amazing. They are your eyes
and your Ds.
But with an S, you cannot do this, because what you do, you set back your project not just by what you put on them, but by another huge amount.
And that is so insightful, because I know I've led several large teams, and it makes me think about some of those individuals, and they would absolutely have been S's.
That sudden change in the way they are working, that sudden changes S's don't like. You do this to a D, they'll be like, tell me what needs to be done. Just tell me why, and I'll do it. And the same goes with I's.
They don't even ask you why.
They don't even ask you. But with S's, they don't deal well with change.
That's uncertain and unsure and unsecure. While what they have right now in front of them, that's a well-known reality. That leads into the fourth style, which is compliant. With them, it's really interesting because they really, really value time. The only problem is that they value even more perfection. So when they find a gap, they will go down and start fixing it. And then they find another crack, and then they go even deeper and fixing it. And you see, they are already 2-3 levels below what needs to be done. And they will go deeper and deeper and trying to fix everything and make everything perfect. Not just make everything perfect. The problem is that you go down that rabbit hole and you forget where the starting point was. So suddenly time becomes irrelevant, because perfection is so much more important than time itself.
The thing about projects is that's what you have a deficit of. Time is generally never on your side. And no matter how well you've scoped out a project, often people are always throwing things at you. If you, as a project manager, don't know enough about your team, you either just dish it out because in your mind perhaps we can get it done, without understanding how everybody else does it. And if you have a combination of the C's, you're giving them something and then they just keep trying to tweak it and you don't really know. And in their mind, it's a real thing that needs to be done, even though you don't see the value. How do you manage that mix of people if you don't even know what you're managing?
You can spring anything on anyone if you use the right language, and if you prepare them, and if you help them and ease them into what you want them to do. People are amazing. People want to help. People want to give their best. People want to put the best version of their work on the table. But the question is, how do you approach them and how do you help them be the best version of themselves instead of just saying, here's the thing, it just needs to be done. So there's people who you can do that with, and there's others who actually need a bit of help, love, TLC. And often what we find is that, especially on a management level, managers forget.
Yeah, absolutely, because of all the pressures and things. But it's also because, and it's what I find a lot of, project leaders or project teams are typically thrown together without training on that sort of stuff. We don't get given this knowledge. Often we're a subject matter expert and people say, right, that means you're assigned to this project and you just have to work with people you've never worked with before, you don't know anything about them, but nobody focuses on it. Everybody just focuses on the work, the commitments that have to be done without thinking about the things that will stop us.
Yeah.
And look, I'm not saying that it's easy to be a project manager, because it's not. You suddenly have to have a finger on the pulse for everything. It's not an easy position. But if you take the time to look around first and to learn a little bit about your team and to understand who you are going to work with, a lot of things can change and you can lift the productivity. You can fit in more just by understanding how to use your team in the best possible way.
I was just going to say that that's where the challenges of communicating what you really need to do goes out the window, because you don't know if you're communicating and using the right languaging to the right kind of people for it to be even breaking through any kind of barriers that they might have in their minds about anything that they need to do.
So if I was to provide a summary of what we've talked about for those leaders out there who are leading project teams, Firstly, be curious about who you are. Find out who you are. Find out what your relationship to time is. Find out what the things you love to do are. And then question those people around you up and down to find the value in what we need to do and how things are going to work. And then obviously communication is a big part, but the first thing is to really know who it is that is surrounding us. So once we know ourselves, know those around us, so we know how to communicate. We know what the expectations are, those downtime expectations will be with our teams or with any of our managers, for example, having that awareness. And it sounds like it's tough, but actually we do it as project leaders. We do it all the time anyway, but just having this extra card in your back pocket to say, right, I'm just going to suss out who my team is that I've been assigned. What are these people made up of? And there are probably just a couple of questions you can ask where you can find out. Then that way, when you are dishing out responsibilities, you're doing it collectively and you're actually working to people's strengths, as you've just said. So I know for me, having been on projects for a long time and working in both the team and the management role, having this knowledge and this awareness would have made my life so much easier. I would have had the confidence to question things. I would have had the empowerment to be able to speak to my team and give them that empowerment back too. I think those are all wonderful things and tools for people to use too in their profession. So thank you for your time and sharing. I could ask so many more questions because on the matter of mindset and productivity and time, I know that there are so many directions we could have gone in, and perhaps you can join me down the track. Thank you for your time and your very valuable knowledge. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Karine. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, and thanks for giving us this opportunity to share a piece of our craziness around.
I think it actually eases a lot of our craziness, to be honest. As I said, I will share your details, so if people want to get in contact with you, they certainly can. And I, for one, would absolutely recommend that people do, because on projects, it's something that would be such a valuable tool to be able to get the best out of people and the best outcome for your teams as well. Have a great day, guys.
Thanks you.